in northern Cameroon. And then you had a female suicide bomber, 40 years old, had explosives strapped to her body and it crossed into Cameroon from neighboring Nigeria. And, she was threatening to blow up, blow herself up and everything. And local residents took matters into their own hands. They had this, what they're calling an amateur militia, and they killed this suicide bomber before she was able to blow herself up by shooting her with a poisoned arrow. And, there's a couple of things I want you to pull from this story. One, there are, of course, terrorism all over the world. We talk about it in Europe. We talk about it in the Middle East. We talk about it here. A lot of times, areas like Nigeria and things like that, they get completely ignored. It doesn't make big-time news. But it does happen. It happens all the time. And this, most likely this was Boko Haram related, which, by the way, they've pledged allegiance to Daesh. And so it is going on there. So that's one thing I want you to take from it. Two, here you had two separate instances. The first one, a 14-year-old girl blew herself up. So that right there shoots two of the big-time narratives of President Obama, directly from President Obama, when talking about the threat of refugees. Remember that when the refugee talk was really heated up and all these governors were saying they were banning refugees from coming to their states and all that? What did the president say? Oh, well, you people are just afraid of women and children. Well, over and over again, we keep seeing an increased use of women and children in terrorist attacks. Hell, that one right there in Cameroon, it hit both of them. It hit both. It was a child and it was a woman. So it kind of shoots that in the ass right there. And the third thing I want you to pull from this story is probably the most important. Was it a government force that took this woman out? Nope. Was it a police force that took this woman out? Nope. It was a local militia group that stood up to the threat of terrorism and stopped a suicide bombing by shooting her with a poison arrow. I mean, that's freaking crazy. But I mean, that speaks to their setup there and everything. They embrace militia groups, and obviously it's a different world, and you really can't compare. The two. But what happens when anybody mentions militia in this country? Heads explode. Oh, they're anti-American and they're all crazy and they're out to kill people. Are there shitty people involved in the Patriot movement? Well, of course there are. There's terrible people involved in everything. But the Patriot movement in this country is by and large, made up of some of the most, the greatest Americans that we have. Veterans, constitutional loving Americans out there. And they're not out to overthrow the government. They're not out to cause unrest or anything like that. They're out there to defend our way of life. And I'm tired of seeing, militia used as a dirty word. Tired of it as it being a negative. But that shows you how much control the media has of the way we process things and the way we look at things. It's very, very telling. So it wraps up, the terrorism discussion today. And while we're talking about things abroad and also talking about, the impact of the 2016 election, I do want to, highlight one more story here, having to deal with socialism. And, of course, I talk a lot about the Republican candidates and things like that, but very, very real, in-your-face reality that we're dealing with is the fact that look at the divide between Democrat and Republican right now. It's wider than any point that I've ever seen. The left has fully embraced the far left ideology. By and large, I mean, not always. There are still some moderate Democrats out there, and you see that in so many people who have switched party affiliation so they can vote for Trump. But the quote unquote establishment, and I got to come up with a different term. Maybe you guys can help me with that. We need to come up with a different term for the establishment. I'm tired of saying it. It's getting thrown around too much, and it's losing its meaning. I want you guys to think about that and give me some suggestions on how else can we refer to the quote-unquote establishment. But, the hardcore establishment Democrats out there have gone so far to the left. And I pointed it out during the Democrat debates. You have Bernie Sanders, who is an open and admitted socialist. He calls it democratic socialism, but there's really no difference. And you have Hillary, who's just a freaking whack job on damn near every issue. But they're out there arguing on national television over who is more liberal and who is more radical on the issues for the left. And, they keep pushing, especially Bernie Sanders, pushing this love and this idea of socialism and how it's just wonderful. And I've made the point a bunch of times on this show, and I'm going to highlight it for you here, but it's worth repeating. What is the textbook definition of socialism? It's very easy. You can look it up in any dictionary. It's going to tell you socialism is the transition between capitalism and communism. Period. So the folks who say, it has nothing to do with communism, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. And this idea that, everything should be free and the government's going to take care of everything for you. The government should be involved in every little bit of your life. Down with big corporations, Give everything to the people. That whole thing is this massive lie. It has never in society, throughout history, it's never worked. And for a prime example of how these things play out, be it socialism, be it communism, take a look at some of the countries who are still practicing these things. Venezuela is well known. Now they have a different breed, I guess, of socialism, but they're having ridiculous problems there. And they've had them for years, but it's getting worse and worse. They had, over the weekend, 6 members of the Venezuelan military were detained by local authorities for stealing goats. Now, that is, there's so many jokes there, I'm not even going to touch it. But, 6 members of the Venezuelan military got arrested for stealing goats. And the soldiers confessed to stealing them and said they did it to feed themselves because they have no food in their barracks. Now, John Marzak, who's the director of Latin America Economic Growth Initiative, said that it's not a good sign when your military doesn't have enough food and when the military has been relegated to guarding and protecting food lines. They're broke. I mean, they are so screwed. Food shortages, they have no shit paper. They have no freaking toilet paper. Inflation is through the roof. Everybody talks about the inflation rate in the United States. Look at Venezuela, folks, 181%. 181% inflation rate. Their money's worthless, absolutely worthless. It was announced a couple weeks ago that they're shutting down all the electric in the country, a couple days a week because they're running out of electricity. All their public employees who, because they're a socialist type structure, the government workers, that's mainly everybody in the country, are now only going to be working 2 days a week because of drought and electricity shortages. Now, somebody tell me again. Somebody tell me again how socialism is a good thing and how America can benefit from that. Now, I get it. I absolutely get it. And this is going to challenge your preconceived notions a little bit here. But true socialism, true communism, if you take it out of real-world practice and just put it in this magic fairy tale land, put it in a vacuum where it's not affected by anything else, the idea sounds utopian. It sounds like a wonderful thing. Everybody working together, everybody sharing, the government, taking care of everybody and supporting each other. Nobody having advantages over anybody else, and everybody's on the same playing field. Those ideas are what are so appealing to so many of these young voters out there. These folks are out there feeling the burn. No, I'm not talking about STDs, though I'm sure a lot of them probably have them. But Bernie has massive amount of support from college kids. Huge amount of support from college kids. Because they hear those things. Well, yeah, it sounds great. College is free. Healthcare is free. I don't have to get a job because somebody's going to give me food. The government's going to take care of everything. And evil corporations are killing us. But in practice, when you apply it into the real world, put it into the gravity of real world policies, it never, ever works. Never works. For a number of reasons. One, the people can't support it. It can't support itself. It doesn't bring in the funds to do everything that a country needs to do to operate. That's first and foremost. But beyond that, socialism to a point and communism to a definition is that everybody's on a level playing field. There are no upper class. There is no elites. But every single time it's been tried in history, there is an elite class. Look at China. Look at Cuba. Whoever's in charge has always put themselves above everybody else. So the system fails. It falls apart. It does not work. And it scares the hell out of me. It really scares the hell out of me that so many people, especially young people, who have the power of the internet, they can research anything at the click of a button. They have no concept of this. No concept at all about what any of this stuff means. Scary. It's really scary. And one more story here, and then I'm going to take a break. Again, going back to this world threat and this rise of rhetoric, did you see John Kerry, old Count Chocula himself, making some demands against Syria? I meant to tie this in with our Russia stories earlier, but I somehow overlooked it on my list. Part of this, democratic, diplomacy-based plan in Syria was for there to be this transition period for Bashar Assad to be removed from power. And the Russians agreed to it. The Iranians got on board with it. This is supposed to be the whole big thing here. And John Kerry told reporters at the State Department, saying the target date for that transition is the 1st of August. So now we're coming up to May. So either something happens in these next few months, or they're asking for a very different track. He wouldn't specify exactly what kind of consequences they would face, and it's unlikely that the White House would approve, more American combat in the country. They say that most likely they would approve giving Saudi Arabia and the quote-unquote moderate rebels new weapons to fight Assad. Folks, this sounds exactly like the old red line. Obama put that out with the whole chemical weapons thing. I'll draw the red line. You use chemical weapons against your people. We're going to remove you from power. And they never did it. So I think this is I'm afraid that this is the same thing. That he's just saying, hey, hey Syria, hey Moscow, hey Iran, you promised we're going to transition Assad out of power, and if you don't do it, there's going to be consequences. Oh, well, Mr. Secretary, what are those consequences? Well, we're not going to talk about that right now. It's because they don't have a plan. They don't have a plan. And then he also spoke